Hello there, fabulous fourth graders. I cannot believe we've read 20 chapters of Finding Gobi. 20. We are now on chapter 21. Right, Kermit? 21. Dion and Gobi spent several more days in the apartment. They didn't see the men in the dark suits again, though Dion guessed that they were probably still watching from somewhere nearby. But Dion had decided not to let fear stop him and Gobi from enjoying themselves as much as they could. They took long walks, they played and napped, and Dion even made friends with some of the locals when he stepped out one night to get some food. But finally, they were ready to go. Kiki had worked her magic and they were flying to Beijing the next day. Dion was glad Kiki was there, especially when they headed to the airport. Gobi already didn't look very happy about being stuck inside a crate. Dion hated to think how she'd look after a 3-hour flight spent in the cargo hold. We don't have a choice, Kiki had explained to Dion. There's simply no way Gobi can fly in the cabin with you. Dion knew that was true. Here in China, they were oddly suspicious of dogs. Some people had even crossed the street when they'd seen him out walking Gobi. Kiki was right. They would never let Gobi fly with him. Take care down there, Dion told Gobi as he settled her into the crate. He added an old t-shirt so she would have something that smelled like him, and she had food and water and a cushion to lie on. All in all, it was a nice, cozy little space. The question was, how would Gobi do with altitudes, especially when that mixed with speed and cold? There was nothing else Dion could do, though. To get back home, they would have to fly from either Shanghai or Beijing, and that meant flying to one of those two cities first. Besides, he decided that it was better to know beforehand how Gobi would handle being on a plane. This way, if there were any problems, he and Kiki could figure out ways to help Gobi handle traveling better when it was time to finally leave China. Gobi whined and whimpered. She did not like this at all. The crate itself was not so bad. She was used to being able to roam at will, but at least there was enough room to turn around in here. And it had a comfy bed and food and water, and the tall man, her person, had put one of his shirts in here, so it even smelled like him. But she did not like being in this busy, noisy, smelly, crowded place. There were just too many people, and she couldn't run and hide. True, she had the crate to protect her, but what if they got in somehow? She would have nowhere to go. Then some men put her crate on a strange shelf that moved, and it carried her away. The tall man and the nice lady disappeared, and everything was dark. That passed eventually, and Gobi found herself in a large, noisy room that smelled of metal. All the people here were rushing around, and some of them grabbed her crate and moved it onto a covered cart. That drove out onto a big open space, and Gobi barked when she saw the sky again. Whew, maybe the journey was over. If so, it had not been nearly as bad as she thought. But no, instead of taking her back to her person or even releasing her, the men drove the cart over to a big metal box sitting out in the open. Then they loaded her crate and a bunch of other boxes and bags into the bottom of the box. It was dark in here and chilly, and Gobi barked and barked. All the men did was secure her crate with some straps and then leave her there. She was all alone. And it got worse. After a little while, the box shook and made loud clanking noises. Then there was a steady, almost deafening roar. And then the whole box started moving. Gobi could tell it was moving fast, too, faster than she could run, maybe faster than a car. Then there was a strange floating sensation, and the world tilted. She fell down, but fortunately landed on her bed. Some of her water and her food spilled, though. When they finally righted again, it was so cold. Gobi could see her breath every time she gasped. She barked, but nobody came, and she finally gave up and hunkered down on her bed with a whimper. This was horrible. She finally fell asleep, but it wasn't restful. She kept tossing and turning. When would this nightmare be over? Sadly, Gobi turned out not to like flying, at least not in the cargo hold. By the time Dion was able to retrieve her crate after the flight, the inside of the crate looked as though it had been put through a blender. The water bottle had been smashed, the leash had been chewed through, the food was scattered everywhere, and Gobi was snapping and shivering and staring wide-eyed all around her. That was probably her first flight ever, Dion realized as he spotted Kiki by the door and waved. She returned the gesture and motioned for them to join her. Good flight? Kiki asked as soon as they were all together. She glanced into Gobi's pen and sighed. No, I can see that at least one of you didn't enjoy the flight at all. She led the way toward the parking garage, where she had left her truck. Well, you're here now. You made it. As soon as they were in the truck, Dion released the catches on the crate door. Gobi leaped into his arms, and he held her and petted her until the shivering stopped. You're okay. You made it. It's all right, he promised her. But of course, he knew that this was really just the beginning of their journey. I've got a space all set up for her, Kiki promised as she drove out of the airport parking lot and onto the streets of Beijing. She'll be comfy, I promise, and I'll be here in Beijing the whole time. I'll stop by to see her every day, even if I'm not in the office that day. Gobi had to spend the next month here in Beijing while they got her another round of medical approvals and waited for permission to take her out of the country completely. She would be staying at Kiki's kennel, and Dion knew she would take good care of Gobi. He smiled as Kiki reached over and ruffled the little dog's fur. It was obvious that Kiki loved animals, and clear that she already liked Gobi in particular. And Gobi liked her too. The little dog licked her hand, which made Kiki laugh. They would be fine together, he was sure. But that didn't make leaving the next day any easier, though. It broke Dion's heart when he said goodbye to Gobi. She obviously knew something was up because she whimpered and whined and pressed against his leg as if she was urging him not to go. He told her, I'll be back, I promise. And he gave her a final hug. You'll stay with Kiki for a month, then I'll come get you again and we'll head home. Except that they wouldn't be able to go straight home, he knew. He would come back so that he could fly Gobi to London, but then she would have to spend the next 4 months in quarantine in Heathrow. He didn't want to think about that right now, though. They had just made it to Beijing, which was the first step. He just had to focus on that. Dion tried not to look back as he headed for the door, and he tried not to hear Gobi whimpering behind him. It was the same noise she had made that day of the race, when they had reached the river and he had started across without her. But this time, he knew he couldn't turn around and go get her. It just didn't work that way. I'll see you in a month, he told her instead. Then he hurried out the door and tried not to cry. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 21. So we'll see you next time with chapter 22, but at least things are moving forward and Gobi is working towards going home with Dion. Bye, friends.